The first half of this video contains minor gameplay spoilers, while the second half contains major spoilers all around. You will be warned again, but viewer discretion is advised.
This is the day you have trained for, the day you have studied for. Utilize your superior skills, your superior intelligence.
Sit down, rodent!
Sarah, baby! Oh, you were one fly.
Don't make me hurt you.
Learn to defeat your ruthless enemy, Steve of Hackensack.
Ryan, you're gonna get rude.
Shut up, quadruped.
Sega Dreamcast. It's thinking.
I must admit, my experience with the Sega Dreamcast is limited. As a historical curiosity though, I've always found it fascinating. On paper, it had the makings of a successful game console. On top of being priced reasonably at launch, its hardware was outrageously powerful compared to other consoles available at the time. It released with a suite of quality launch titles. This not only showcased a successful transition to 3D for Sega's flagship franchise, but also a selection of games illustrating the Dreamcast's third-party support, addressing a major stumbling block for the Dreamcast's predecessor, the Saturn. It was the first home console to offer internet support via built-in modem. This allowed players to enjoy games like Phantasy Star Online or Quake 3 together in the comfort of their respective basements, an experience previously landlocked to home computers.
We believe the future of gaming is the internet, and the Sega Dreamcast provides internet connectivity, a 56K built-in modem at $199.
You could speak to other players with a microphone, send photos using the Dream Eye, use a proprietary internet browser with mouse and keyboard peripherals. Suffice to say, the Dreamcast was ahead of its time. Sega's recent hardware efforts had met with failure, with confusing releases of the Genesis CD and 32X add-ons, as well as the beloved but ill-fated Saturn. With the Dreamcast, Sega was poised to reclaim their place as a legitimate competitor in the console wars. So where the hell did it all go so wrong?
It was a real crush to the egos of everybody. I mean, I remember I was in the meeting where we were told that the Dreamcast was not going to continue, and everyone just was silent. Everyone was just speechless. You know, no one said a thing. It was just very heavy, very oppressive.
Financially, the system didn't make a whole lot of sense. In an effort to penetrate the market, the Dreamcast was priced very competitively. So competitively that the profit margins on console sales became razor thin. With a decreasing ability to court developers, poor marketing, and the shadow of Sony's upcoming PlayStation 2 looming large, a cocktail of circumstances led to the Dreamcast's commercial failure. It was the last console Sega ever made, but its legacy lives on. There's something about this console, out of place, out of time, that just interests me. If I close my eyes, I can almost imagine tearing open the wrapping paper on Christmas morning, excitedly uncovering the Dreamcast and a copy of Shenmue. I'll have to live vicariously through those of you who really did have this experience. In exchange, you can pretend you're me opening up a copy of Yu Yu Hakusho Spirit Detective. Odd consoles that don't sell well have a habit of retaining their intrinsic value more so than their cooler and more popular brethren. Playing these systems is partaking in a slice of history that comparatively only elite few have borne witness to. There's a collection of strange little games, heartfelt expressions from often forgotten developers, forever marooned on consoles condemned to the back rooms of video game history. Every once in a while, these games are given opportunities for redemption, ports or remasters to systems with greater visibility, but sometimes even a second chance isn't enough. Near the end of the Saturn's lifespan, Sega began putting together a small team. The goal was to create an original RPG experience that would take full advantage of the Saturn's hardware, a swan song, if you will. The nature of this game would remain ambiguous until Rieko Kodama was offered a role as producer. Kodama had proven her development chops as director of Phantasy Star 4. This had been a landmark title for the Sega Genesis and one of precious few titles capable of sticking it to Nintendo's RPG machine, the Super NES. While her work as producer and director had given her notoriety within Sega, her experience as an artist leaves no less of an impression. As art director on titles such as Altered Beast and Phantasy Star, as well as zone artist for Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2, she had an eye for bold, striking designs within the limitations of Genesis hardware. Perhaps it was this combination of artistic sensibilities, technical understanding, and an increasing business acumen that allowed Sega to place their faith in Kodama. Their Saturn RPG, which sat in an amorphous pre-production state, would find its footing with a visionary at the captain's helm. Taking on the moniker of Overworks, various divisions within Sega united under one banner to work on the game, dubbed Project Ares. This included staff of the critically acclaimed but woefully underperformed Saturn RPG, Panzer Dragoon Saga, among others. With Sega's Dreamcast on the horizon, Overworks decided early on that they would take advantage of this next-generation technology. The team remained small but mighty, optimistic about their vision. This was punctuated by a smooth production, thanks to the leadership of Rieko Kodama and the multidisciplinary knowledge of directors Atsushi Semiya and Shuntaro Tanaka. It was a far cry from the notoriously difficult development cycle of, say, Panzer Dragoon Saga, due in no small part to the Dreamcast's vastly improved architecture over the Saturn. In 1999, Project Ares would be publicly unveiled as Eternal Arcadia, or Skies of Arcadia in the West. It would be a world born of many inspirations, including Studio Ghibli's anime epic Castle in the Sky, Robert Louis Stevenson's adventure novel Treasure Island, as well as Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, just to name a few. In a time when JRPGs were characterized by convoluted lore, moral ambiguity, and grimdark settings, Arcadia would rediscover the genre's roots and blaze its own trail in the process. The focus wouldn't be on interpersonal drama or high-stakes save-the-world situations, but the simple joy of adventure. The player would partake in a new age of discovery, not in the high seas, but the sky itself. To quote Kodama, to adventure in a world like that, with 360 degrees of total freedom in the wide-open skies. It's the perfect setting for one's dreams, don't you think? When Skies of Arcadia was released in 2000, it was critically acclaimed. The characters, story, and perhaps most notably the world itself were praised for their thoughtful implementation and attention to detail. While games like Breath of Fire 4 and Vagrant Story pushed the PlayStation to its absolute limits, the Dreamcast displayed the rich anime-inspired world of Arcadia without breaking a sweat. The only real problem was that nobody had a Dreamcast to play it with. Hyperbole aside, Skies of Arcadia's sales were lackluster, perhaps predictably so. Less than 1 year after the game's release, Sega would announce discontinued support for the Dreamcast and remove themselves from the console market forevermore. While this marked the end of an era, it also represented an opportunity for the Dreamcast's hardworking developers. No longer tethered to a failing console, Sega's in-house studios were free to work on more successful platforms, such as the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and the Nintendo GameCube, the latter of which found itself in a similar position to the Dreamcast. Lagging behind its competitors in sales and lacking third-party relationships, Nintendo successfully rallied support from Sega. This mutually beneficial relationship resulted in, on top of many original titles, a number of enhanced Dreamcast ports. The Sonic Adventure series, Phantasy Star Online, and Ikaruga all found heightened success on the GameCube, and it would only be a matter of time before Skies of Arcadia received the same treatment. Skies of Arcadia Legends would release worldwide in 2003, an upgraded version of the game with bonus content and improved visuals. Despite another round of critical praise and fanfare, not even a GameCube release could spare Skies of Arcadia a financial keel-hauling. It would be forever relegated to cult classic status, not played by the many, but adored by the few. And I do mean adored. I can't believe how many requests I've had to make a video on this game. Me? Are you sure about that? The impact Arcadia had on so many can't be overstated. There's just something about this game that resonates with so many people. My intention, as with all my videos, was to get to the bottom of why that is. What is it about this game that has so many holding its torch, however dim that light may be, decades after release? Sadly, Rieko Kodama passed away in 2022. Regardless of whether or not her games found their way into your life, you just gotta have respect for this woman. To blaze such a legendary trail in an industry which, at her time, was a boys' club, while maintaining this uncompromising creativity is exemplary. She may be gone, but the spirit of joy and childlike wonder she hoped to impart in her work lives on forever. Before talking about the game in depth, it's worth discussing the differences between the Dreamcast and GameCube releases. Skies of Arcadia was undoubtedly a more impressive product when it launched in 2000. By 2003, next-generation consoles had all come out and displayed impressive graphical capabilities. To make the package a bit more enticing, Skies of Arcadia Legends was released with some additional content and quality of life improvements. First of all, there's a wanted list. As the story progresses, this list will highlight new pirates that can be found, battled, and turned in for a reward. It doesn't have a significant effect on the game, but the exchanges that occur before and after these battles are really amusing, and there's something to say for inclusions that enhance the feeling of swashbuckling adventure, which this does wonderfully. My personal favorite are the impersonators. There's always an AliExpress version of the main cast in these games. It's like the Beatles before and after Revolver. There's also a collectible called Moonfish that can only be encountered in the Legends version. On top of being exchanged for rewards, there's a notable side story attached to these. Frankly, I was surprised to learn that this wasn't included in the Dreamcast version. It's quite significant. In both versions of the game, the player can encounter discoveries. The GameCube version simply has more. A fun distraction, but not a deal breaker. I'll talk more about these details later on, but suffice to say, the GameCube version comes across as a director's cut of sorts. In terms of gameplay, there were changes made here as well. In the Dreamcast's favor, the GameCube is missing an activity called Pinta's Quest, due to it requiring the Dreamcast's Visual Memory Unit, or VMU. Various treasures can be found on the VMU, which can be transferred to your file in-game.
I feel like this wasn't designed for somebody in their late 20s with Polish sausage-sized thumbs.
There are also invisible items called chams in both versions of the game. While playing the Dreamcast version, the VMU will beep depending on how close you are to the chams.
I don't know if it was real necessary to make it sound like there's a bomb about to go off. Oh my god, where is it?
This is just replaced with a visual on-screen indicator in the GameCube version. The VMU integration is a fun novelty, but isn't really competitive with the exclusive side quests of the GameCube version, in my opinion. It'd be easy to play the game without realizing those changes were made in the new version. What's immediately noticeable, however, are the changes made to the encounter rate. Arcadia had developed a reputation for its high frequency of turn-based battles, and don't worry, we will talk about that. For now, note that Legends alleviated this problem with some light rebalancing. The frequency of battles is reduced and the experience gained per fight is improved. It may not seem like much, but trust me when I say, this will make a big difference. Hilariously, the Dreamcast's GD-ROM drive will shriek in agony when a fight is about to start, so if you quickly pause the game, you can reset the encounter rate. Interesting way to cut down on annoyance, but you'll still be missing out on precious experience points. Load times are also quite a bit better on GameCube, leading to improved pacing across the board. From a technical standpoint, there are some differences of note as well. Legends features some minor graphical changes. Skies of Arcadia begins to blur textures at a distance for the sake of hardware efficiency, but the rate at which the detail changes appears to be a bit more generous in the Dreamcast's favor. While the GameCube version's models boast higher poly counts and thus more detail, especially for the main cast, distant textures such as the clouds or moon look slightly worse in Legends. Is this going to be perceptible for the average Joe Schmo? Well, as a Joe Schmo myself, I can say, no, not really. You have to be looking for the visual differences to really see them. More prevalent than that, I think, is the soundtrack. It's just worse in the GameCube version. The MIDI instrumentation is less layered, leading to sequenced arrangements that lack the original's robust sound. Here, take a listen. It could be the result of developers trying to cram a 2-disc Dreamcast game onto a single GameCube mini-disc. As a result, even the orchestral arrangements suffer from noticeable compression. While I don't consider it a deal breaker either, it's worth considering that the Dreamcast sound quality is overall quite a bit better. In spite of that, I decided to play the Legends version of the game. There's just too much precious content you'd be missing out on otherwise, and the promise of less random encounters is, by itself, too enticing to pass up. When a game commands my attention before I've even reached the title menu, I know I'm in for something special. The sun sets, accompanied by a bittersweet orchestral melody. Sometimes you just know you're gonna be sad to see a journey end, even when you haven't started it yet. Speaking of which, let's start this journey. Skies of Arcadia opens up with a dynamic introduction, establishing our antagonists. In pursuit of a young woman, the crew of a battleship, commanded by the arrogant and snappily dressed Admiral Alfonso, attempts to disable her ship. The goal is to take her alive. As they zero in on her position, their ship begins taking fire from an unseen adversary. Ascending from the cover of clouds, the attackers reveal themselves. Their ship may not be as impressive, but as confusion abounds, Alfonso's vessel is boarded. This is Vice, a member of the Blue Rogues, and the first words out of his mouth tell you everything you need to know about him and the Rogues. Not letting him hog all the glory and treasure for himself, Vice is joined by his childhood friend, Aika. The two are quickly surrounded by soldiers of the Imperial Valua before Vice's father and the captain of their ship shows up to lend a hand. His name is Dine, and he instructs Aika and Vice to set off in search of the ship's bridge, acting as an informal tutorial of sorts. We're introduced to the basics, character control, and the turn-based battle system, which I'll discuss in greater detail later on. I find this opening especially effective for two reasons. Gameplay-wise, Arcadia doesn't drag its feet. You don't have to collect 10 squint feathers for the village maiden, nor have the elderly mayor painstakingly explain the basics of turn-based combat to you. Your intelligence as a player is respected, and from the moment you're given control, it feels like there's significance in what's happening. Story-wise, we're given an immediate introduction to this world, our main characters, and their vocation. The dialogue conveys each character's personality rather than spending time on exposition. Rather, it lets the on-screen action do the talking in that regard. The Dreamcast's improved hardware is immediately used to the advantage of the story. Cinematic cutscene direction, expressive facial features, and first-rate animation share the burden of storytelling, alongside the traditional text-based dialogue. While previous generation games such as Xenogears, The Legend of Zelda, and Vagrant Story have impressive cutscene direction all their own, it's clear that the Dreamcast's hardware advantage is colossal. There are just so many more tools here used in storytelling. You almost expect to see the key grip show up in the credits. Still not sure what that guy does. Given its association with development staff from Panzer Dragoon Saga, you might be disappointed to find that the voice acting is minimal. But when you hear what little there is, you might agree that text-based dialogue is for the best here. Maybe she was a little congested on recording day, I can relate. In an act of cowardice, Alfonso flees the ship, leaving it and his crew to face certain annihilation. But that's not what the Blue Rogues are all about. As the imperialist Valuans reach for new territories in Arcadia, the Blue Rogues fight for the common man, and part of that fight is liberating Valuan wealth. More importantly, Dine's crew rescue the center of Alfonso's interest, a young woman named Fina, who knows oddly little about the world she lives in. Her inexperience is our gain as Vice and Aika explain the dichotomy between the virtuous Blue Rogues and the avaricious Black Pirates, the latter of whom tarnish the good name of all air pirates. It's not long before the ship arrives back at its home port, Pirates Isle. Pirates Isle gives us a chance to stretch our legs. In case you were wondering, yes, it's really comfy. There's an attention to detail I wasn't expecting in this game. The amount of unique characters you can interact with is very impressive. I mean, just look at this guy. Don't you want to toss back some Loqua with him? Oh yeah, they have to change all the alcohol references to Loqua. You don't want kids knowing that alcohol exists. There's just so much clutter that can be examined, secrets to find, and bits of the environment to interact with. Check it out, these two guys waving flags to communicate. They didn't need to add that, but I'm glad they did. The beginning of the game sets a high standard that's somehow maintained throughout the runtime of the game and adds a real feeling of care and intangibility to the game world. Oddly enough, in that way it reminds me of Shenmue. Both games just assume the player will want to go touch and look at everything. The devil's in the details. Those Dreamcast developers, man, they had it on lock. There must have been something in the water. Pirate's Isle isn't just a subterranean lair. The surface acts as the quintessential JRPG hometown, with all of the trappings that come with that. Exploring people's houses, dojo where you can learn the basics of combat, and a bunch of kids that coerce you into a game of hide and seek. But with comfy JRPG hometowns, a plot-triggering tragedy usually isn't far behind. After running an errand the next day, Weiss and Aika return to find Pirate's Isle in shambles. No schmaltzy cutscene, no emotional music, you simply disembark and wander around the destroyed remnants of your hometown. This game is confident in its ability to communicate feelings to the player without being heavy-handed, and I think this is a great example. It's worth noting also that a lot of environmental descriptions change after the attack, a small but appreciated detail to drive home the meticulousness with which this world is crafted. The Blue Rogues have been captured by the Valuan army, along with Fina. Weiss and Aika, as the last two capable air pirates, set off on a journey to rescue their comrades, and it's here the story begins in earnest. You're given limited time to explore and sail the skies before Weiss becomes disoriented, lost in the fog caused by an arc whale. Our heroes are rescued by one Drachma, a salty dog with an artificial arm who's spent the majority of his life hunting down the arc whale, named Raknam. He joins forces with our heroes, and together the three infiltrate a Valuan prison, rescuing Weiss's father and the Blue Rogues from the belly of the proverbial whale. Saved twice from the Valuans, Fina reveals her true identity and purpose. She's a Sylvite, a descendant of the mysterious Silver civilization. In this world, each element is associated with a moon of its own color. With many moons orbiting Arcadia, each civilization has developed their own history and culture depending on the properties of its moon. As their powers grew, they developed living weapons called Gigas and waged war on each other. One day, a cataclysmic event called the Rains of Destruction cleansed the land of its inhabitants, leaving few survivors. Thousands of years later, the Valuan Empire seeks the Moon Crystals, treasures which allow for the commanding of Gigas. As a descendant of the precursor civilization, Fina was given knowledge of the Moon Crystals and sent to gather them before they could be misused. Hence why Valua needs her captured. She alone knows the exact location of the crystals. Yes, that's correct. Skies of Arcadia is a game where you travel the world trying to find crystals associated with the elements while battling an evil empire. While the premise may not win any points for originality in the JRPG sphere, I'm much more interested in what the game does with this premise. There's nothing new under the sun after all. Of course, Weiss and Aika insist on helping Fina gather the moon crystals. With that, our characters set off for a second time with the primary goal of the game in mind. Skies of Arcadia's introduction has some of the best pacing I've seen in an RPG. It drops you right into the world, giving you the required information without subjecting you to endless text boxes or ham-fisted exposition. You immediately feel some connection to these people and their struggle, which makes Pirate's Isle quickly feel like home. The stakes are high, but not so monumental as something like Chrono Cross or Xenogears, which makes the classic adventure angle of this game feel appropriate. We know what we need to do, but the urgency isn't at critical mass, allowing ample time for exploration, which is a significant component of this game. There's a magic in Skies of Arcadia's world that's present from the moment you set off on your quest. As Kodama put it, 360 degrees of freedom in the wide open skies. It's difficult to appreciate just what that means until you've experienced it for yourself. Most RPG world maps, especially at the time of this game's release, constrain the players to an X and Z axis, forward, backward, side to side. Occasionally you'll be given an airship, and though as a rule, RPG airship music is pretty groovy, flying often works in much the same way, barring a few points of interest in the sky. Your ship in Arcadia gives you a degree of control that feels boundless and unconstrained. If you see something interesting hidden in the fog below you, you'll often be rewarded with discoveries when you swoop down for a closer look. As a matter of the in-game history, much of Arcadia's world remains unexplored and unexplained. In each section of the world, a wealth of unique structures and occurrences await your discovery. From the ethereal will-o-wisps to a peculiar golden ship flying pilotless for an unknown number of years, the world of Arcadia is enriched with these discoveries. Information can be sold at sailors' guilds around the world, allowing others to find these points of interest and enhancing the feeling that Weiss and his crew are explorers of the unknown. Hints guiding players towards potential discoveries can also be purchased at the guild, although sometimes they're a little obtuse. I'll put it this way, if you plan on hunting down every discovery, you'll spend a lot of time sailing around a general area mashing the A button. Since I didn't want to hate this game, I decided not to do that, but to each their own. The monetary rewards are helpful, but if you pursue side activities, you'll have more than enough money by the endgame anyway, so completionism isn't necessary. Outside of discoveries, unexplained phenomena threatens your progress. Swaths of darkness and colossal tornadoes halt your journey, or provide an inviting challenge depending on the player. In this way, Arcadia cleverly gates progress. There are hard stopping points that can only be overcome with various ship upgrades doled out over the course of the storyline. Floating rock faces, indestructible gates, and high-altitude islands remain inaccessible to our ship without the proper accoutrements. In this way, you're effectively led down a pathway without feeling stifled or railroaded. The sense of freedom begins when you first shove off from Pirate's Isle, and it's only ever increased over the course of the game. While in a technical sense there are literal walls stopping you from progressing, clever use of fog, visual design, as well as that freedom of movement really sells this grand illusion of limitless sky. Pair that with small visual details such as collectible schools of flying fish or merchant ships making the rounds on their trade routes, and it feels like Weiss and company are a part of something bigger. The name of the game here is Scale, and the world feels massive. You might be a giant compared to a fish, but when you reach these landmasses or see these weather patterns taking shape, you begin to feel insignificant. The game does an excellent job of capturing that exploratory balance of fear and excitement that characterizes so many nautical adventure novels. The key difference there is the surrounding world. While thinking about the depths of the ocean might instill terror, one can't help but wonder what awaits a man overboard in Arcadia. How long will you fall? Where will you end up? Questions many an Arcadian sailor has asked, but none have lived to answer. A shipwreck found on a cliff face might seem like a disaster, but it's hardly the cruelest fate a sailor can meet out here. That gap in knowledge that even the most seasoned sailor faces really inspires one to search out all corners of the world, and it's a curiosity that's generously sated throughout the story. The little UI touches such as the old-time sailor's map and compass are nice details as well. It sells the sailor's life so well I almost expect my crew to start dying of dysentery. Speaking of crew, what's a ship without a good crew? Why, it's no ship at all. There's a variety of great characters in Skies of Arcadia, starting with our immediate cast. Weiss, our lovable captain with a keen sense of justice and an impulsivity befitting a pirate. There's Weiss's childhood friend, Aika. Losing her parents at a young age, Aika took to Weiss and his family, and they've been inseparable ever since. More calculated than Weiss, but still a risk taker. They complement each other perfectly. They move in tandem and nearly finish each other's
sandwiches.
Sentences. Standing opposite to the pirates is Fina. Quiet, delicate, and introverted, Fina comes from a lonely background, with Weiss and Aika being her first real friends. Over the course of their adventures, Fina is gradually pulled out of her shell. She may be naive in worldly matters, but she stands tall in the face of opposition again and again, her friends and mission always in the forefront of her mind. Then there's Drachma. I love cynical old men as party members, and Drachma delivers big time. His boat, called the Little Jack, is used as the player's vessel for much of the game. As mentioned, his primary motivation is hunting down and killing the arc whale Rachnam. It's clear from the outset that Drachma's character is heavily based on that of Ahab from the novel Moby Dick.
Split your lungs with blood and thunder when you see the white whale. Break your back and crack your oars, men, if you wish to prevail.
Sorry, force of habit. There are underlying reasons to Drachma's grizzled persona that become clear over the course of the game, making him a particularly interesting character. Outside of the crew, the Empire of Valua acts as the central antagonists for much of the game. Led by the vile Empress, Commander Galcian heads his armada in pursuit of Fina. While the Empress is largely driven by the desire for expansionism, Galcian simply lusts for absolute power. I think Skies of Arcadia's overall simplicity and straightforwardness in matters of plot and characters is going to be a point of contention for some RPG fans. In the late 90s and early 2000s, many RPG studios were trying their hand at something more dense, thematically rich plots with extensive backstories and psychologically complex characters. This was a far cry from the humble origins of JRPGs, inspired by classic struggles of good and evil and Arthurian legend. Arcadia's development team decided early on that they'd want their games to embody that simplicity. Outside of Square's enduring Dragon Quest series, Kodama felt mainstream RPGs were losing their connection to casual audiences. As a result of these decisions, Arcadia's elements strongly embody archetypes, both in character and in story. The hotshot, the tomboy, the curmudgeon, the fish out of water, the geriatric wearing a rubber chicken suit. These are just some surface level observations, and all characters carry several layers to them, revealed as time passes. But more often than not, the game adheres to convention. You may be disappointed if you're interested in a deep, comprehensive character study, a la Xenogears, and I can understand that. I love being in over my head as much as anyone. However, I would say don't write Skies of Arcadia off because of that. Characters written in this way are symbols that reflect aspects of our personalities. This makes it easy for us to become attached to the characters of Arcadia. You see your own strengths, foibles, and aspirations of who you wish you were projected onto these characters. They take the limitless complexities of humanity and synthesize them down into an easily digestible format. I guess you could say this is my defense of character simplicity. When games like Skies of Arcadia or Dragon Quest are criticized, it's often part and parcel with a belief that simplicity is synonymous with boredom. As a man who enjoys methodically unraveling complex stories, I simply don't agree. I think the most profound truths are often found in deceptively simple packages, and that's why stories such as the rebirth or the hero's journey still resonate with us, despite their being told for thousands of years. There's captivation to be found in the world of Arcadia that constantly makes me feel like a child again, and in my opinion, that's a valuable quality. Outside of Galcian, we contend with the 5 admirals. First there's Alfonso. We've already had some experience with him. He's egotistical, eccentric, and cowardly. Then there's Gregorio, the only admiral who immediately exhibits honorable behavior. A remnant of the old Valuan order, Gregorio remembers a time when the Empress had a kind heart. While he still swears fealty to the Empire, he finds its recent direction to be questionable. There's Vigoro. He's just a walking, talking version of the Chad meme. There's very little spoken dialogue in Skies of Arcadia, just short statements used to establish tone, and they don't mince words when it comes to Vigoro.
Hey, baby.
There's Beliza, the only female admiral in the Armada. She's known to be an expert in matters of deception and manipulation, which we'll have some first-hand experience with throughout the story. Finally, there's DeLoco. I don't even know what to say about this guy. His design is just apeshit. He looks and acts like a Powerpuff Girls villain and brings some comic relief to the table. As we move throughout the world obtaining the crystals, Weiss and the crew will have multiple confrontations with the various admirals. Their personalities are varied and entertaining, and the game wastes no time establishing just what kind of people they are. You can't help but look forward to the next run-in, always wondering what kind of eclectic character you'll be dealing with. The structure of the game is typically as follows. You sail to the next civilization in search of their moon crystal. There's some kind of problem they'll be dealing with, which Weiss opts to help them solve, resulting in finding the moon crystal either by happenstance or as a reward from the area's leadership. I'm speaking in a very general sense here. The game will often throw a wrench in your plans or otherwise play with your expectations. Structurally, it shares a great deal in common with Dragon Quest in that way. It's a great excuse to sail the world, finding new civilizations and liberating their natural resource in exchange for the secrets of pirate democracy. Just kidding about that last thing. The locations in this game are just as important as the characters within them, and Arcadia seriously delivers when it comes to both quality and quantity of areas to explore. Before shoving off to your first civilization, the Little Jack stops at Sailor's Island. When you first set foot here, there's a welcoming atmosphere that just makes it feel like a sanctuary. The personality that shines through in all other aspects of the game is on full display here, with a great jaunty little tune playing and the inhabitants of the island all with their own little visual quirks and animations. This guy looks like he's having an epileptic seizure throughout the entire game, and I think he's just happy to be on land. It seems that Skies of Arcadia took some inspiration from popular games at the time, namely The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, at least in regards to character design. There's some familiar looking faces across the game. As far as inspirations go, you could do a lot worse. You'll become real familiar with Sailor's Island as the game goes on. Many times you'll come back to report your adventures, find new crew members, and upgrade your ship. When you first pop into Sailor's Island, it feels like an RPG town. A comfy one, but just an RPG town. As you fight new battles, acquire new vessels, and explore the world, you start to feel like these weary sailors that populate the island's pub, where once you were fresh-faced and prepared for the unknown, soon you'll have your own stories to tell. The life of a sailor isn't just a vocation held by NPCs, it's the life your characters live, and Sailor's Island is a constant reminder of how far you've come. I love how the game slowly immerses you into this life of adventure. You don't even realize you're becoming a real Sky Mariner, it just kinda happens. Outside of the center zone, the world is separated into distinct regions. Our first destination is the Kingdom of Nasr. Okay, if we need to have a desert level, I guess it's best to get it out of the way, nice and early. The Nasr Kingdom exists under the Red Moon, the fire-based element, which, of course, makes it very hot. I appreciate the effort the game goes through to tie the moons into the world's culture. For example, red moonstones produce extra hot flames that give Nasr Kebab a distinctive flavor. A lot of RPGs base their in-game worlds on real-world cultures, but it's fun to see seemingly mundane things given a mystical explanation. Within the Nasr town of Maramba, there's quite a few secrets to find. Exploration is rewarded in the least intrusive manner possible, subtly encouraging you to go off the beaten trail without disrupting your experience. Discoveries and bounties are necessary to make money, which can be used to buy equipment and upgrade your ship. Moonberries are a special item that can only be found via exploration, and also rarely as a battle reward. Their use allows you to unlock super moves, which are extremely helpful, bordering on necessary by the end of the game. There are also hidden items called chams, which can only be found following an audio prompt. Chams are a resource used to level up Fina's weapon, which is actually a cute little character named Cupel. Too bad the game didn't do well, I smell a prime merchandising opportunity. Outside of battles, exploration is key to character progression, so it's a good thing that Skies of Arcadia's exploration is so much fun. I mean, look at this shit. Somebody on the dev team said, "Come on, dinosaur camel thing, let's go," and they just threw it in. At this point, I'm reminded quite a bit of a Western RPG, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Yeah, there are major differences, but aesthetically and thematically they share quite a few similarities. Coder offers freedom in story choices, while Arcadia offers freedom of movement. Just something I noticed. Speaking of story choice, you're given a few opportunities throughout the game to pick a dialogue option. It doesn't affect the plot one way or the other, but it does affect Vice's swashbuckler ranking. There are various invisible calculations being made in order to give you a ranking, such as picking more Vice-like dialogue options and making discoveries. There's no monetary incentive to chase a ranking, but I do like how characters start recognizing you and referring to you based on it. It's especially prevalent at Sailor's Isle, just on account of you'll be talking to those characters so many times. It's like a marker for in-game progress, I dig it. The Kingdom of Valua exists under the Yellow Moon, and its capital is where the Blue Rogues are first rescued by Vice and Ica. The capital is another impressive area, with the city split between the lower and upper class quarters. The lower class area is a truly depressing sight. Both sides of the city are shrouded in perpetual darkness, but those in the Undercity have become completely destitute, their position in life forever affixed to the lowest rung. The upper city conversely enjoys wealth and ample artificial lighting, its citizens cartoonishly pompous and ignorant. Unfortunately, you're not really given much city to explore here. The upper city in particular only consists of a few buildings, nearly all unenterable. Still, it's interesting to get a look at the heart of the evil empire up close and personal. The kingdom of Ixtaka is associated with the Green Moon. An expanse of forest and vegetation, Ixtacan culture is primarily based on that of indigenous Mesoamerica. There's a direct parallel between the real-world conflict between the Mesoamerican tribes and the Spanish colonialists as well, with the Valuan Empire enslaving the Ixtacans and razing their jungles to the ground in search of the Green Moon crystal. For a game made with all ages in mind, Skies of Arcadia paints quite a grim picture of this conflict. I'd say it's not really up for debate either, given that Valua uses Spanish naming conventions for its people. I'll save my commentary for the other kingdoms for the spoiler section, but this should give you a taste of the variety you'll find in Arcadia. Loosely tying that theme of new world discovery in with these real world parallels makes the world feel familiar, yet just alien enough that you're never sure what to expect. Pieces of our own history and cultures are mixed together in compelling ways. In spite of this, I found the world of Arcadia felt somewhat underdeveloped. Histories, monuments, and cultures that beg further explanation are never given such, depriving the game of world building. Certainly this is a matter of preference, and some things are better left to the imagination, but context regarding the history of Valua or the background of the Blue Rogues is conspicuously left absent. The game has no shortage of flavor text, and I do appreciate that, but it leaves just a little too much of the world and its actors to the imagination for my taste. Too much unnecessary detail is a hindrance, but just enough details help us care. If the heart of an RPG is its story and characters, then the combat must be its appendix. Sometimes life would be better if it were removed. While the combat in Skies of Arcadia is a mixed bag, but let's start with the basics. Using a turn-based interface, you deliver commands to your crew members, at which point all of the battlefield's actors will take turns depending on their speed. Nothing new there. Where Skies of Arcadia differs is in its element system. As you acquire moon crystals, you'll have the ability to switch out your character's current element on the fly. Like other games in the genre, certain enemies will be strong, weak, or immune to certain elements, and finding out which is largely a matter of experimentation. Unlike games such as Shin Megami Tensei, getting the right element is rarely a matter of life and death, just a minor hindrance or boon. Completing battles with certain elements equipped will slowly level these elements up, allowing you to learn new spells along different element lines. Thankfully, elements and equipment can be switched on the fly without missing a turn. Red will grant you fire and strength enhancing spells, green is associated with healing magic and poison, a valuable distinction to make, FYI. Yellow contains electricity and stat debuff spells, blue magic involves water and speed buffs, purple is ice magic and various stat ailments such as confusion, and finally silver magic allows you to cast instant death as well as life restoring magic. Despite your character having definite stat strengths and weaknesses, the magic system allows for a bit more free-form character growth throughout the game. You can choose to have each character dedicated to one type of magic, or have the party learn a little bit of everything. There's no real way to pigeonhole yourself. Universally, spells cost 1 MP to use, but what really dictates your magic ability in fights is a shared resource called spirit points. Throughout a battle, you'll gradually build up this SP as a party. Once it reaches a certain threshold, you can use spirit points to cast a spell or use a super move. The caveat, of course, is that if SP drains for one party member, it drains for everybody, so you do have to be particular about the kind of abilities you want to use. While SP is automatically restored each turn, you can also choose to have party members focus, which boosts the amount of SP you'll get back. The battle system itself works fine, it's not cumbersome or anything. The visual effects for spells are pretty great. There are a large variety of enemy models and animations. The giant Baphomet sloth thing kinda comes to mind here. One thing I really like is that party members will do battles with enemies even when it's not their turn. It doesn't affect the game at all, it's just a little visual detail that keeps battles looking dynamic, where otherwise they'd be awkwardly standing still waiting for their turn, like a kid waiting for the teacher to stop talking so he can ask to use the bathroom. There are some fundamental problems with this combat system that become clearer as the game goes on. The first problem is that super moves are so obviously superior to the majority of spells that their use essentially makes most schools of magic redundant. This is compounded by the fact that many of the most exciting spells to unlock are made obsolete as you find items that perform the same function. A spell that resurrects an ally to full health may be invaluable at first, but it won't be long before you can buy items that do the exact same thing, and they're not very expensive either. There's really no point in using precious SP on an elemental spell when you've undoubtedly got a party member with a super move that's twice as good. In a nutshell, cheap, freely available items and powerful super moves render the magic system obsolete over time. I think there are a few ways this could have been mitigated. Making powerful healing items more prohibitively expensive, limiting when you're allowed to use super moves, and having enemies' elemental weaknesses play a more significant role would have given more depth and value to the magic system. However, and this is a big however, the way that Skies of Arcadia is structured now will kinda make you glad that battles are over with minimal input. I'm talking about the encounter rate here. Perhaps Arcadia's most infamous quality, Yeah, it's pretty bad, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. It's encounters themselves that drag the experience down for a few specific reasons. Objectively speaking, the encounter rate isn't more frequent than the majority of turn-based RPGs out there, at least not on the GameCube version. I think people's issue with the encounters in this game comes down to two significant problems. The first problem is that battles take quite a long time to complete. This isn't a Final Fantasy where you can quickly wipe out trash mobs in one turn by mashing the confirm button. Each encounter requires you to jump through hoops in order to end it as quickly as possible. Many enemy teams are comprised of some enemies that are immune to magic and others who aren't. Even with basic mobs, you'll have to designate your team members to do certain things to certain enemies. And that's fine, I don't want people thinking I'm averse to strategy. The problem is it's not really strategy. You sort of act autonomously after a while. Picking the right things for the right enemy teams becomes a matter of muscle memory. This often includes shielding yourself from enemies with one-hit death spells, of which there are more than I would prefer. The second problem is that these random battles intrude on exploration in a very unwelcome way. It's one thing when you're in a dungeon, but another altogether when you're trying to enjoy sailing the open skies. I know it's not uncommon to find enemy encounters on world maps, but this is one case where I strongly believe the game would have benefited from removing world map encounters altogether. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker gets away with having enemies while sailing because you don't have to stop or even slow down really to engage with them. Skies of Arcadia pushes you to explore unlike almost any other game in the genre, so to constantly be punished with enemy upon enemy really discourages you from heading off the beaten path. God help you if you're trying to look for an obscure discovery. Looking for the small trigger area to find an invisible island while constantly contending with enemies and losing your sense of direction? It's enough to make a man throw himself overboard, I tell ya. At a certain point in the late game, you're given the option of circumventing encounters on the world map, and it's no surprise that the act of traversal becomes much more enjoyable at this point. I suddenly felt encouragement to seek out new lands and discoveries, but sadly this happens in the final stretch of a 40 to 50 hour long game. I'm not someone who's even particularly annoyed by random battles, but it's just the manner in which they're implemented that gives me trouble in Skies of Arcadia. I believe that's where a lot of Sky's reputation for random battles comes from. Not to say they aren't frequent, which they are, especially on the Dreamcast, but it's more so the natural flow of the game they disrupt and how long it takes from the moment the screen shatters up until you return to the world map. Now, while the standard battle system may be nothing to write home about, there is a significant battle feature that really sets Skies of Arcadia apart. I'm talking about ship battles. Internally referred to as canon fighting mode by the dev team, ship battles add a welcome layer of depth to various in-game systems. The first is the combat system itself, which is almost entirely distinct from the standard battle system. Magic can still be used and spirit points must still be accrued throughout the fight, but much has changed outside of that. Flying airship battles are another aspect of the game that I'm glad we were able to implement. Although creating two different battle systems was very demanding, those scenes are emblematic of Skies of Arcadia, so it was something we couldn't give up on. It's a good thing Overworks were able to manage the logistics of a second battle system, because honestly, it's hard to imagine the game without it. Rather than teams of players and enemies, these battles are fought between your ship and a single enemy combatant. At the beginning of every turn, each party member is given a command to execute on the round of your choice, one turn being comprised of 4 rounds. Your current ship can be equipped with enhancements, starting with several subcategories of weapons. Using a weapon occupies the square in which it's used, forcing you to think carefully about how you'd like to time the use of your arsenal. Main cannons fire only once on their assigned turn, but they deal a lot of damage. Secondary cannons can have their effect cascaded on multiple turns, dealing less damage than the main cannons, but guaranteeing to batter enemy ships continuously. The turn in which a torpedo is fired takes up a slot like anything else, but the turn in which it strikes an enemy can be chosen at will. A shrewd captain will spot an opening, organizing main and secondary cannons as well as torpedoes to strike at once, initiating a cinematic sequence showcasing the battle with changing camera angles and heroic music playing. Not all attack openings are created equal though. Displayed with a color-coded grid, the upcoming round has various slots of advantage and disadvantage. Green represents a neutral turn in which both combatants have equal opportunity to dish out and take damage. Yellow means advantage for your foe, placing you on the back foot as your opponent deals increased damage. Red is a severe disadvantage for the player, almost always resulting in an extremely powerful attack. It's best to guard on these turns or make sure that you've got a repair spell ready for the turn after. The chance icon represents a critical advantage for the player. Save up your SP and use all of your weapons on these rounds to maximize damage. Finally, there's the special cannon icon. As the ship you use is upgraded and eventually changed altogether, you'll gain access to special cannons. While they require a heavy SP cost, using them will often turn the tides of battle in your favor. The resulting animation is so spectacular, and throughout the game, using that special cannon never gets old.
Moonstone cannon, fire!
Ship battles are a lot of fun, and they play out like cinematic board games, engaging more strategic thinking than standard battles and cleverly using looping backdrops to deliver a sense of weight and momentum in combat. You're often presented with decisions in fights which change the enemy's strategy and the openings that you'll have available. As cool as it is, these battles do suffer from some of the same problems as standard combat. Namely, the accessibility of items renders most spells useless. As is a pet peeve of mine, the majority of bosses in this game are completely immune to status effects and debuffs, leaving healing and elemental damage your only magical options. The problem is that repair kits and ship weapons perform the same tasks but more efficiently. I know, I'm repeating myself. I wouldn't harp on the issue if I wasn't such a stickler for seizing on missed potential. That is to say, if Skies of Arcadia wasn't such an incredible game, its missteps wouldn't be as noticeable. My other problem with ship combat, well, it's pretty specific. However, it's statistically likely to affect about 4.5% of you, as it did me. I have protanopia, that's red-green color blindness. The green and yellow tiles on this board look identical to me. Identical. The red distinguishes itself enough to stand out, but not green and yellow. Usually I can discern small differences in shade or brightness level, but not here. No matter how much I squinted or what angle I looked at my TV from, I couldn't see a damn difference. I asked my girlfriend, yep, that one's green, that one's yellow, so just for the hell of it, let me tell you how I got around this. CHIR.ag is a website I often use while editing. Essentially, using photo editing software, I'll grab the hex code of a particular color I'm curious about. I'll copy and paste the code into this box, and the website will spit out the precise name of the color associated with the code. Sometimes it gives me incomprehensible color names like Nightwinkle or Breakfast at Tiffany's, but usually it works pretty well. Not here though. I took a screen grab from my game capture and used a sampling tool, but depending on the precise pixel I sampled, it'd spit out a different color. Sometimes it was algae, other times it was pastel green or pesto, but either way it was very unpredictable. I moved on to a new technique. In the beginning of a round, I'd take a screen grab. This time, in the photo editing software, I'd crank the contrast to max levels. At a certain point, the differences in brightness become noticeable to me and I can finally begin my plan of attack. I tried adjusting brightness and contrast on my TV, but it just wasn't as noticeable. As the game went on, I made sure to maximally upgrade my ship and carry lots of items, mainly because I just wanted to stop giving a shit about the colors, so I did. I probably would have driven myself crazy if I'd carried on with the contrast trick throughout the entire game, so I decided fairly early on, after a couple ship battles, that I'll just take the L and play suboptimally. Skies of Arcadia is gracious enough to let you restart from the beginning of battles if you die, both on foot and in ship. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate this. It might seem like a minor quality of life feature, but consider how many times in an RPG you've died and been forced to go through the last part of a dungeon and watch an unskippable cutscene again. I see this as a mercy worthy of commendation. Speaking of dungeons, there are many in Skies of Arcadia, and they're usually enjoyable affairs. In each section of game, there's at least one thematically appropriate dungeon crawl to be had. Of course, Nasser holds the obligatory pyramid romp, while Ixataka's labyrinthian mines will have you sent back to the starting point with too many missteps. Thankfully, Arcadia avoids the trappings of the linear dungeon crawl, featuring sprawling, multifaceted areas that often contain simple but enjoyable puzzles and optional paths in which you can pursue treasure. Some of the dungeons become downright bizarre and ethereal, my favorite being the mountain peak of Rixus. The music track that plays here just beautifully frames the mystery and serenity of this ancient temple. Well, you've spent most of the game flying above the clouds, something about it here just hits different. In each area, finding the Moonstone will result in the associated gigas rising from its long slumber. The designs of these demigods are awesome, for me bringing to mind Evangelion's angels with some resemblance to the designs from Shadow of the Colossus as well. That sort of ancient artificial construction just makes the imagination run wild. What could have created such a thing? I mentioned the gigas now so that you and I can appreciate just how great this scene is. Technical limitations be damned, the sense of scale portrayed in this game is stellar. While not all dungeons achieve the same level of mechanical and visual creativity, each one is memorable in its own way. At the center of Mount Kazai, a moon crystal is surrounded by a magical pool home to an ancient guardian turtle. Within the seemingly impenetrable Maw of Tartus is a cave system so expansive that it has to be navigated in your ship. All dungeons may not be created equal, but the distinctive atmosphere of each one leaves some kind of lasting footprint in my mind. I'm reminded of Panzer Dragoon Saga's ability to just drag you into these mysteries of a world long forgotten. Even seemingly innocuous hieroglyphics may be a warning of things yet to pass. Suspending a player's disbelief is a difficult job, one that's bolstered heavily by a game's presentation. While Skies of Arcadia Legends may not have had the same wow factor that the original did, you can see from front to back just how cleverly the developers wrung every bit of performance from the Dreamcast. That's why I consider this to be a Dreamcast game, spiritually, even if you're playing it on GameCube. I don't need to rationalize myself. Intuitively, you know I'm right. Characters are brought to life with a vivid, colorful anime style that represents the personalities of each one perfectly. Facial textures are regularly swapped to represent the changing of emotion for each character. There's no guesswork as to the intonation of dialogue. Characters will slink away with defeated looks on their faces, or jump in the air, mouth agape, shouting with joy. High contrast colors are used to create impressions in the player's mind for each character, a staple of animated character design. It's not just impressive design, but all of the little technical touches as well. Hair, clothing, and flags will flutter in the wind, making the ship scenes feel dynamic. Wind will stream from the wings of your ship, and smoke will follow projectiles as they're launched through the air. The developers paid careful attention to lighting and camera angles, heightening the drama of cutscenes. It's one thing to witness a scene of destruction, but another altogether to see the flickering flames indirectly lighting characters' faces as they bear witness to it. With increased poly counts comes more impressive and expansive outdoor sections, and though the various cities within Arcadia are deceptively small, the deception is sold quite well. Outside of using pre-rendered backgrounds, it's difficult to create an abstraction of size in a 3D environment. Skies of Arcadia achieves this by sectioning off different parts of its towns. In Maramba, reaching some buildings requires the player to use a mount, crossing a small section of desert. The Ixatacan town of Horteca separates its buildings with ladders, poles, and slides, forcing you to create a mental map as you navigate to your desired area. The fully 3D environments allow for some impressive and unique architecture, further making each area feel like a real, lived-in place and the product of its local culture. Having rooftop access to many of these buildings is just icing on the cake. It's easy to take this tridimensionality for granted, but giving the players this level of freedom of movement was pretty unique at the time, and it's a gambit that paid off. One of the most touted qualities of this game among its fanbase is undoubtedly its soundtrack, and with good reason. In my opinion, Sky's soundtrack never quite reaches the soaring heights of its Squaresoft contemporaries, but it's extremely solid throughout. Here are some examples. The Blue Rogue's theme is driven by a bassy synthesizer using the sounds of traditionally island-esque instruments like the xylophone and pan flute. It creates a mischievous but jovial atmosphere, which is just perfect for where you are. The battle music, well, I sure was tired of hearing it by the end of the game. I can't deny that it's a great theme. The intro just pumps you up, while key changes keep you on your toes, from anxious to optimistic, just what a battle should be. The composers, Yutaki Minobe and Tatsuyuki Maeda, must love their arpeggios. The dungeon themes do a great job of capturing that sense of intrigue and discovery. suggestive without being too overbearing. Probably the coolest feature of its music is the way the boss theme works. The theme itself is great, but what's more, it'll actually adapt depending on how well you're doing in the battle. You feel absolute peril when an enemy lands a devastating attack thanks to that frantic theme. But there's nothing sweeter than landing a critical hit, healing up your characters, and listening to that heroic music cheer you on.
Take that!
It's accomplished in a pretty rudimentary way, but thanks to the sounds of battle, its transitions sound seamless, and it adds so much hype to this game. Suffice to say, there are a lot of great tracks in the game. Even the filler songs all have appropriately upbeat, adventurous cadence. The MIDI instrumentation is pretty noticeable, especially on the GameCube version, but the melodies themselves are memorable. The standouts on the soundtrack are, of course, the fully orchestrated tunes, which themselves are just a celebration of the childlike wonder that Arcadia evokes. The best time to play Skies of Arcadia was as a kid, but the second best time is right now. This is your official spoiler warning for the next section of video. If you haven't experienced the game for yourself but want to, you can turn the video off or skip to the conclusion. Otherwise, please join me as I talk about the finer points of Arcadia's world.
Alright, now that those plebs are gone, I can finally speak frankly. How about that sewer dungeon in the beginning of the game, huh? Those newbies have no idea what they're in for.
What's interesting about Skies of Arcadia is that, while obtaining the first 2 crystals is a straightforward matter, the rest of the game becomes less so. Rather than moving from zone to zone finding treasures of the elements, the latter part of the game becomes a pastiche of JRPG tropes, joined together with some unconventional connecting threads. Seemingly simple expeditions are turned upside down, we stumble across bizarre and alien locations, and, dare I say, expectations are subverted. That all starts with the loss of our 4th party member, Drachma. While Drachma joins the party early on, the 4th slot actually switches a few times throughout the story. In addition to Drachma, you've got Gilder and Enrique. Their respective arc and personalities are all enjoyable and sufficiently different from one another that it's hard to pick a favorite. They're all great. Most RPGs will just add more characters to the roster, allowing you to switch them out at your leisure and featuring the whole cast during cutscenes. I'm glad that Skies of Arcadia doesn't do this. After we're sufficiently familiar with Weiss, Aika, and Fina, having one party member at a time gives the game ample opportunity to spotlight our new compatriot. We can see one-on-one interpersonal reactions, giving me a feeling that the crew are developing relationships with one another. In many RPGs, it often feels like the introduction of a new cast member relegates the others to backup. Sorry Rico, we only care about the shiny new one. Of all party members, Drachma's story certainly hits me the hardest. I said that cynical old men were my favorite party members earlier, and there's a reason for that, aside from the fact that I am a cynical old man. A good RPG will dig into what makes these characters cynical in the first place, and Skies does just that with Drachma. Long ago, he lost his family during a whaling expedition to Rachnam the Ark Whale. Like Moby Dick's Ahab, he began a borderline maniacal quest for vengeance on the whale. Having lost his arm in the accident, he replaces it with a mechanical prosthetic and sets out on his new ship, the Little Jack, named after the son he lost. His only memento, a small box of feathers that Jack used to collect. While the party is on the trail of the yellow moon crystal, Rachnam makes an appearance. The Little Jack takes heavy fire from a nearby Imperial gunship, enough so that the crew decides to evacuate. The crew, except for Drachma, that is. There's a lot to speculate from that little smirk he gives as he shoves the last lifeboat off board. Does he see the humor in how crazy the situation is? Is he pleased knowing that soon he'll die and be with his family? Well, given that Weiss is the only man who Drachma's shared a heart-to-heart with, I have to assume it's a knowing smirk. You know I can't go with you, I've got business to take care of, even if it kills me. This kicks off one of my favorite sections of the game. Mechanically, it's nothing special, but thematically, it's really emblematic of Skies of Arcadia as a whole. Aika and Fina are separated from Weiss. While the former two are rescued by an air pirate named Clara, Weiss crashes into an unknown landmass. From there, you have to spend several days collecting wood, hunting for food, and doing what you can to survive. If Robinson Crusoe's influence informed any one part of this game, this would be it. I really enjoy survival stories, so it's kind of fun taking a break from the main story and just tackling each day's problems one by one. After finding the remains of a sailor named Gonzalez and giving him a proper burial, Weiss is rescued by Gilder and boards his ship, the Claudia. It's easy to like Gilder. Everyone in the crew up till this point has grander ambition, but Gilder is a simple man. He likes having fun and he likes women. He's dependable in the sense that you can depend on him to pursue simple pleasures. Now, this entire section of game is hilarious, one of the most creative slices of an RPG I've ever played. See, both Aika and Fina have ended up in Nasr's capital of Nasrad, dropped off by their rescuer Clara, who's in pursuit of her lover, Gilder. Weiss ends up in Nasrad as well. The ladies start working at a restaurant to save up money so they can buy a ship to find Weiss. Weiss and Gilder wander around town for their own purposes. The two parties don't cross paths, and while it's pretty amusing, it just keeps going. Both groups end up in possession of half a treasure map, two different halves of the same map. Supposedly, it leads to the treasure of a man named Decat, so they decode their respective halves and find the island, each arriving at a different entrance. The player has to control both parties navigating through Decat's cavern, activating switches and creating pathways for the other. The groups have no idea that their separated comrades are in the same temple as them. As far as they can tell, the labyrinth is simply adjusting itself, leading to new areas. At last, the teams find each other. They crack open a giant treasure chest and find a note along with a single gold coin. Comrades, trust, and cooperation. These are the only true treasures in this world. Mildly frustrating? Perhaps, but wonderfully ironic nonetheless. Gonzalez died in search of this. Maybe it's good he met his end when he did. There is literal truth to the note. The pursuit of treasure brought our teammates back together. A new sword or some gold would be cool, but having Aika back in the party so she can use Lambda Burst to nuke enemies is the greatest treasure of all. I mean friendship. Friendship is the greatest treasure. This entire section from Weiss's rescue up until the rejoining of the party is just so perfectly executed. The way they keep crossing paths with their respective halves of the map is a prime example of a story using synchronicity without having it come across as a cheap convenience. Like the maps themselves, these two stories coalesce in a natural way. Taking advantage of our characters' inclinations to explore the unknown, the story introduces us to some fun new characters and rejoins our separated team sans Drachma. Is it a coincidence? Sure, but it feels well earned. Unfortunately, the celebration is short-lived. The city of Nasrad is besieged by the Valuan armada, led by a mysterious reoccurring character called Ramirez. While his design does reflect that early 2000s edge much anime-inspired media was using at the time, I've got to admit I quite like Ramirez. Many of the heroes and villains in this game are boisterous with their personalities on full display, but there's an understated elegance in Ramirez that makes him unpredictable. As right hand of Galcian, he lays waste to Nasrad and captures the party, marking one of several occasions we find ourselves in Valua. Throughout different parts of the game, we get to experience a much more human side of the Valuan generals. Well, as mentioned, some are just too mustache-twirling, too tying women to train tracks to explore in greater depth. A few of them are actually quite likable. One such example is Beliza. Early in the game, she deceives the party by acting the part of a belly dancer named Belena. After effectively having Weiss fall in love with her, she has him find and retrieve the red moon crystal for her. While it hurts to be taken advantage of, she continues to have this optimistic charm and a degree of self-awareness that makes me like her quite a bit. It's the same with Vigoro. Although his primary character trait is being horny, there are cracks in his guise at points that have you coming around to this oaf. It's during this escape from Valua that we receive the Delphinus, a vessel that'll last us to the end of the game and a home base of sorts. Now, one of my favorite aspects of Arcadia is this home base mechanic. The reason I saved this for the spoiler section is because I had no idea this was coming, and it was just such a cool surprise I wouldn't want to ruin that for anybody else. The Delphinus itself can be entered and walked around. While vehicles can feel transient in RPGs, you begin to see this repurposed Valuan flagship as home. That's in no small part due to the player's ability to recruit crew members at this point. While many crew members will be picked up automatically during the story, the majority are purely optional and some quite easily missed. One thing Skies of Arcadia is very good at is giving you reasons to return to earlier towns and outposts. This prevents them from feeling like disposable levels, a trap even the very best RPGs often fall into. This is doubly true now, as you'll almost certainly miss out on new crew members if you ignore the various civilizations you've visited throughout the game. Each crew member is assigned a particular role, through which they can either provide passive stat bonuses or be called upon for active effects during battle. There are 2 crew members for each job on the Delphinus, so you can switch them out depending on your desired effects. One of the most powerful aspects of this newly introduced system are the crew special moves. These are incredibly strong abilities that require a full SP bar to use. The first is called Prophecy.
In dire need,
We call forth
the power
of the ancients!
to battle our foe.
This is just the corniest shit on planet Earth, but I love every second of it. The second is simply titled Blue Rogues. It allows you to summon each active member of the Delphinus to come provide attacks, healing, stat buffs, and a variety of other bonuses. It's pretty fun switching out crew members to see their little animation and hear their blurb during attacks.
The Rejuvenator's ready to go.
I tell ya, establishing characterization for bit part crew members was just handled effortlessly by these designers. There's so much personality stuffed into your scant few interactions with them, and I especially love the way their dialogue changes depending how far into the story you are. The crew attacks aren't game-changing by any means, but they're a fun reward for surviving long enough to fill your SP bar to its maximum during bosses. It would have been enough to have the Delphinus as your base, but Skies of Arcadia actually goes one step further. Crescent Island, where Vice was cast away, is repurposed as a new Pirate's Isle for our crew. Vice creates a safe haven where his blue rogues can return, and it's extraordinarily comfy. There are characters and shops down here, some of which can be invested in to produce higher quality goods. Up top, you'll watch as your humble surroundings are transformed into a thriving little community. Gonzalez even gets his own memorial. At your direction, certain buildings can be upgraded and decorations can be constructed. There's not a whole lot of decision making involved, but it's a fun distraction and a welcome use for money. I love watching the different crew members' cultures influence the construction of their various businesses and shelters. It's just satisfying to see it all come together over time. You're even allowed to choose a flag to represent your new crew. Among other things, Skies of Arcadia is a story about leaving the nest. The legacy of Vice's father casts a shadow over him, but as the game goes on, Vice steps outside of that shadow. Their parental relationship becomes one of mutual respect, with the two seeing one another as fellow air pirates and competitors. There are numerous parallels to Pirate's Isle within Crescent Isle's design, and Vice's brash decision-making develops into competent leadership as his responsibilities grow, mirroring his father. Vice having his own base, ship, and crew highlights this well. What it all adds up to is a tremendous sense of ownership. Vice's swashbuckler rating changes as Vice the Unimpressive will eventually become Vice the Competent, Vice the Admirable, and Vice the Hero. It's difficult for me to suspend my disbelief when I'm referred to as competent, but Skies of Arcadia upholds the illusion effortlessly. As your rating improves, so too do you feel like you're filling that role. Crew members look up to you, and you see the results of your hard work in a tangible way. You feel that in the vast unknown frontier of these skies, you've carved out a place for yourself in this world, and that is what characterizes so much of my positive feeling in regards to Skies of Arcadia. Mechanically, these additions are simple, but few games go to such lengths in order to sell the inexplicable magic that is adventure, but that's the only way I can describe the sum of Arcadia's parts. One of the bigger side activities involves finding these little guys, moonfish. There's a doctor sailing around with his adopted daughter, who he took in after her father died. As a result of her past, she's become catatonic. The only thing she can communicate is that her little pet named Piccolo needs moonfish to grow. And grow he does. As you search the world for moonfish and bring them back, Piccolo becomes bigger and bigger. Each time he's fed a moonfish, he'll cough up a hairball with a useful item inside. Unlike my cats, whose hairballs rarely, if ever, contain useful items. Oh, come on, Gizmo, give me something good. What about you? You got anything going on up there? On top of the material rewards, seeing Piccolo grow will slowly help soothe Maria's trauma, allowing her to speak again. Doc will often share stories involving his time in the Valuan military, and it all culminates in Piccolo flying away to find his people, once again reflecting that theme of leaving the nest, even when it's hard. There's some fascinating stuff in Doc's stories. You get a new angle of Valua, which I appreciate. Rarely is evil just evil for the sake of evil. There's often reasons that it became such, and seeing these brief glimpses into the honor that once characterized Valua helps contextualize how they've fallen. In particular, you're given insight into Ramirez's backstory, who he was, the ideals he once pledged himself to, and the betrayal that led to his becoming jaded. It's a significant piece of background that's entirely absent from the Dreamcast version. I can only assume that the development team ran out of time when it came to delivering characterization for Ramirez. This addition is a nice compromise, a fun little diversion that also offers some much-needed insight into Ramirez's rise and fall. I've mentioned more than a few times, allowing players to pursue significant pieces of content if and when they desire is something I'm a big fan of in these games. It shows the developers have confidence in their work and respect for the player's agency. On the topic of the game's writing, it's always worth bringing up the translation of a Japanese RPG. First of all, the quality of this translation is rock solid. There are very few missteps, no misunderstandings, and a lot of the tone is communicated well. Figures of speech are used often without it being overly apparent that creative liberties are being taken, and arguably, that's the ultimate goal of a translation team. However, there's a point of contention worth discussing here. To quote lead translator Clayton Vorlick in regards to Skies of Arcadia, "Yeah, we basically sat down, I did a rough translation of the text and threw away the Japanese text. We mapped out the big story beats in each scene and then just watched the cutscenes and ad-libbed what we imagined each character would say, and then just rewrote a lot of dialogue completely. This really rubs me the wrong way." Now, again, just to be clear, it's not a localizer's duty to rewrite the script one-to-one from Japanese to English. Good localization requires a firm grasp on the linguistic challenges of either language, circumventing hurdles and adapting topics that are spoken of in different terms. In the end, localization teams need to exercise creativity while also respecting the original source material. Vorlick revealed that the main cast's dialogue was rewritten wholesale, and on top of that, many characters, weapons, and enemies were renamed, sometimes as member of the English Quality Assurance team. Whether that's an amusing shout-out or an unwelcome debasing of the original script is going to depend largely on what you believe a localizer's goal should be. It'd be unfair to lay all the blame at the feet of localization teams, though. It's the publishers themselves who insist on censoring various in-game costumes, the changing of alcohol to loqua, and the removal of cigars, blood, and other potentially controversial aspects of the game. However, the most painful acknowledgement for me was Vorlick's recollection that the translation team was inspired by Joss Whedon's work. We live in a world where every second video game tries to emulate Joss Whedon's work. The fact that not even Japanese games are safe from the Joss curse sends a shiver down my spine. I'm only being half ironic, by the way, knowing this has kind of retroactively ruined Vice's opening line for me. Still, there are aspects of the translation that are very impressive to this day. The amount of flavor text that successfully made its way into the English release is amazing. I guess there's also something to say for their ability to reconstruct scenes of dialogue by ad-libbing. Still, I'd be lying if I said the flippant manner in which changes to the script are not only admitted but bragged about didn't sour my perception of the game just a bit. They went so far as to call Vice's ultimate weapon the Vorlick Blade, since Clayton Vorlick led the localization team. You can go ahead and picture me rolling my eyes now. At a certain point, Gilder returns to his own crew, at which point he's replaced with Enrique, the Prince of Valua. Enrique doesn't have the sailing experience, but he makes up for it with gusto. I really like how the 3 interchangeable members of the 4th chair have such vastly different personalities. Enrique, with his royal background, carries an air of dignity without becoming overly stuffy. Unable to idly sit by and watch his mother violently assimilate others into the Empire, Enrique joins the party to find moon crystals. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, the party has one of the more unique selection of weapons I've seen in a JRPG. Swords are about as common as it gets, but you don't often see cutlasses or rapiers, which Weiss and Enrique both wield respectively. Drachma uses his prosthetic arm, Cupel shapeshifts into different weapons for Fina, Aika uses a giant boomerang, and of course, Gilder is the gunslinger. They all have their own special moves too, but not all are created equal. There's a few you'll be using all the damn time, namely Weiss's Pirate's Wrath, which shreds most enemies. Aika's Delta Shield, which blocks all incoming magic spells, as well as Enrique's Justice Shield.
May righteousness be our shield. Shield of justice!
Or Shield of Justice, which halves all incoming damage for a turn. The latter two in particular will single-handedly save you from bosses over and over again thanks to their high utility and low SP cost. It's not strictly an advantage, it's downright necessary in some cases, namely Piastol. For unknown reasons, this pirate hunter wants Weiss and crew dead. While on Sailor's Island, Weiss will receive a black spot, a reference to Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, in which the black spot marks a pirate for execution.
The black spot!
At this point, you'll do battle with Piastol accompanied by her Death Hound. The two of them are lethal, and you'll need to use all the tools at your disposal to come out of the fight alive. After each battle, we learn a little bit more about her backstory, culminating in the realization that she's the older sister of Maria from Doc's ship. These seemingly unrelated side quests link together in a surprising way, leading to troubled characters being given formal resolution. Again, the extrinsic rewards are nice, but more valuable is seeing these pieces put back together, something you'd miss if you weren't playing the GameCube version. Outside of the liberally used pirate conventions, the world of Arcadia is rife with the bizarre. One such example is the Dark Rift, a perilous zone that none have come back from. While swaths of Dark Rift might otherwise mark the edge of the world, Weiss decides to venture onward. Sorry to all the crew members who are just here for a paycheck, but we will be flying into Purgatory now. One of the crystals supposedly lies beyond the Dark Rift, which itself is located near the Cape town of Esperanza. The citizens of this town are crestfallen to say the least. Comprised largely of ex-Valuan military, Esperanza was once a symbol of hope and progress for the Empire. Experienced engineers and sailors were brought from near and far to establish the community under the belief that the Dark Rift could be penetrated. After this proved impossible, Valua abandoned the town, leaving the once optimistic pioneers feeling worthless. I like how you can see the combined cultures of Valua and Nasur since it's on the southern tip of that continent. It's only with the presence of the spirited Weiss that the people of Esperanza remember what it is to love sailing again. They watch the Valuans with all of their power and money get their ass kicked by Weiss's crew. The one in charge of this fleet is Gregorio, the only admiral who has displayed any kind of moral compass. A man who's been like a father to Enrique. The Esperanzans cheer as Weiss faces down insurmountable odds, not just in battle, but also by entering the Dark Rift. In one of the tensest and most unsettling moments in the game, the crew travels through a mysterious portal to find an unfamiliar landscape. Numerous shipwrecks and alien creatures dot this fever dreamscape as you attempt to navigate through mazes of portals. They use some cool rendering techniques to obscure your vision. You can also find the last survivor of a shipwreck named Robinson. A little on the nose, but I can dig it. He's actually the long-lost husband of a woman named Polly, bartender at Sailor's Island and possible cook for your ship. In order to get through to him, you'll need Polly as a member of your active crew. This requires you to fly back to Sailor's Island and convince her to join. She mentions earlier in the game that her husband was lost at sea, so it's great to see this portrayed as more than just a little RPG small talk. I really like the way Skies of Arcadia continually rewards you for investing in your crew. Simple side quests add depth and excitement to the exploration as you comb through previous areas, looking for new crew members and solving problems for existing ones. For example, heading back to Esperanza after clearing the Dark Rift, you can talk to a character named Dawn. Previously, he only laughed at Vice's stupidity in wanting to enter the Dark Rift, but now his cynicism shattered, he asks to join the crew. Seeing him hanging out and drinking Miller Lights back on Crescent Isle, it's like Vice gives a lot of these folks a new lease on life. Really makes you glad to go off the beaten trail. The Delphinus reaches the other side of the Dark Rift, and what a breath of fresh air that is after the whole experience. This area is referred to as the Frontier Lands, which feels appropriate given how little we know about it. It doesn't take long before we find a floating wall. A great wall, one might say. Of China. Well, actually, there's a little Japan in there too. This is Yafutoma, a civilization based on East Asia and home to the Blue Moon Crystal. I really like this area. I know all these islands are floating landmasses, but you really feel it here. There's a constant awareness that you're high up in the sky. It makes cruising around in these little teacups a bit nerve-wracking. Somehow the Voluans blast a hole in the previously impenetrable rock wall and attempt to seize the crystal. Of course, Vice and company fight them off, gain the trust of the Yafutomans, while Enrique and Yafutoman Princess Moegi fall in love with one another, which bodes well for the future geopolitical situation. I have to say, there's a bit of missed potential sprinkled throughout the game, and that's evident to me with Yafutoma. We just traveled through the Dark Rift, filled with creatures of unknown origin and wild sights, only to find that the civilization on the other side speaks the same language that the crew does, that their customs and culture, outside of some aesthetic differences, are almost identical. What really cheapens the whole thing for me though is how Valua just casually carves through the rock wall. The game builds up the Dark Rift as this inexplicable energy barrier, one that's claimed the lives of countless sailors, something that even the brightest minds in the military couldn't traverse. We fight our way through it, not knowing what we'll encounter, and feel like badasses when we reach the other side. But conveniently, at that moment, Valua finds a way to open up a much easier path. Now we can just travel through this hole instead. Those feelings of exploration and exclusivity are diminished quickly as Yafutoma becomes just another city in Arcadia. Not a big deal, but it would have been cool to see how wildly different the civilizations could have developed without any kind of contact. So with the Blue Moonstone under the party's belt, it's time to make a truly astonishing discovery. If I'd known this game was going to be propaganda, I never would have played it. That's right, Vice is the one to discover that the world is round. As you unlock new upgrades and find this discovery, it's interesting how the act of navigation itself changes so much. Previously inaccessible areas are made available one after the other, and being able to loop back around to the other side of the map really changes your relationship to the overworld. As you have to backtrack to earlier points in the game, you start thinking in terms of what's currently accessible to you and what's going to be blocked off. It's made all the more fluid as your ship is given a final upgrade which lets you dip far below the clouds or way above them. There's no obstacles in your path, and even better, no random encounters. As you approach the end of the game, the frequency of encounters tapers off quite a bit in general, which is a welcome breather. It's like I'm 36 hours in, I've killed a million of these little hoop assholes, what do I have to prove at this point, right? It's not universally true. There are a few more dungeons as you acquire the last of the Moonstones, some of which are a bit annoying. But personally, I do love the ancient city of Glacia. It's totally abandoned, trapped under the ice, and it's here that the party makes a startling discovery. The Gigas associated with the purple moon crystal is the whale Raknam. Wounded and on death's door, we find Raknam accompanied by Drachma. Raknam had pulled the little Jack in tow in order to help Drachma escape the Voluan soldiers, back when the ship was being attacked. The Arc Whale escaped with a mortal wound before coming home to die in peace. Drachma has been helping soothe its pain and keeping it company as it passes, finding peace outside of his mad quest for revenge through forgiveness. Of all the game's tender moments, I found this one to be most touching. I'll admit it choked me up, alright? How can you watch a whale cry and not feel something? Drachma releases his son's feathers to the sky, accepting that which he cannot change, before setting off on a new quest for meaning. As the game reaches its finale, you're given a few more interesting set pieces. The Silver Moon Crystal is in the hands of the Silver Civilization. Their domain can only be reached with Fina's aircraft, which was shot down during the introduction of the game. Finding it involves taking a trip to the deep sky, which again touches on this fear of the unknown. Using a sonar, you unearth dig sites in search of the aircraft. There's strange minerals to find and also some sea monsters, or I guess air monsters if you will, that become cranky when you disturb the ground. I gotta say, this section really gets the noggin jogging. Every time a ship crashes, it ends up in the deep sky, which itself is the surface of the real planet Arcadia, abandoned for presumably thousands of years. It's eerie to imagine how many people have survived a wreck only to live the rest of their short lives consumed by darkness, surrounded by monsters. You can see the silhouette of some wreckage down here already. It's unsettling. Over the course of the game, we periodically return to the bittersweet reality that completing this quest means saying goodbye to Fina. No amount of rationalizing will ever prepare one for the loss of Best Girl. Oh, why are you booing me? You know I'm right! Fina's quest has been one of philanthropy, but as much as she deserves a little selfishness, she knows she has to return to the Silver Civilization. Her going away party is interrupted by Ramirez leading an assault on Crescent Isle. Ramirez and Fina have been bound by circumstance since the beginning of the game. Only as we approach the end does the connection become clear. Both characters were sent from the Silver Civilization to collect the moon crystals, only Ramirez went radio silent. At some point, Ramirez became close friends with Doc, both working under the altruistic Admiral Mendoza. Having pledged his allegiance and full faith in Mendoza, Ramirez was shattered by his master's betrayal. This drove Ramirez to slaughter Mendoza along with all of his men. This was the moment that Ramirez lost his last sliver of faith in humanity. He was courted by Galcian, who didn't whisper sweet nothings to Ramirez like Mendoza, but told him the truth of this cruel reality. People will betray you, but power is absolute. As he explains his worldview to the crew, the imagery paints Galcian as the new object of Ramirez's allegiance. It's a particularly well-directed cutscene. Galcian's portrayal of the people of this world as driven by baseness and greed and the promise of a revival from degeneracy is enough to compel the despondent Ramirez. It's also revealed amidst the chaos that both Ramirez and Fina contain pieces of the Silver Moon crystal itself. The final shard safeguarded by the Silver Elders, only by returning together can the Silver Crystal materialize. It seems the Silver Civilization's true mission wasn't to save humanity from war, but to raise a lost continent called Soltis, and destroy the world through another cycle of the Reigns of Destruction. Clara and Gilder rescue the crew, but not before Ramirez makes off with the moon crystals. His goal, along with Galcian, is to stage a coup against Valua and become rulers of the New World. It's a grim scene, but the crew finds the will to rebuild, and the party set off to Great Silver Shrine. This part is so bizarre. I mean, it's kinda cool, I dig it, but it's got some really out there stuff. You travel to space beneath the Silver Moon where you have to contend with a zany anti-gravity maze, all while this jaunty little tune plays in the background. The movement is changed to operate closer to tank controls. I guess to reflect the disorientation, maybe? All I can say is thank God there's no random encounters here. It makes the whole experience an enjoyable novelty rather than an exercise in frustration. The elders who sent Fina to retrieve the crystals are confronted, and I've just got to briefly mention their designs. How cool is this?
Electronic old men running the world.
They fancy themselves curators of history, citing humankind's inclination towards self-destruction as reason enough to call down the reins and wipe the slate clean. The Gigas themselves are the creation of progenitor civilizations, used as weapons of war. In order to combat this, the Elders created a Gigas of their own, named Zelos. Created from nothing, Zelos was considered a perfect artificial life form, but fearing its ultimate power, the Elders sealed it in the continent of Soltis, the very same Soltis that Galcian is trying to unearth. This is the extent to which Skies of Arcadia commits itself to the esoteric backstory of the world, and I think it hints at some pretty interesting things. Giving the entire world a foundation of mythology come history, it's not complex or convoluted, just enough of a contrast to set Arcadia apart from other fictional worlds. Galcian and Ramirez arrive to assassinate the head elder, stealing the final piece of crystal and completing their collection. This feels a little less cheap than Valua barging into Yafutomo like Kramer, since it's reasonable to assume that Ramirez has his own space vehicle. The clock is ticking now as Soltis rises from the depths. I can't help but notice JRPGs around this time sure liked having massive ancient continents rising from the ocean. Not that I'm complaining. I really enjoy some of the biomechanical design used for the Gigas and now for the locations as well. The dilemma seems insurmountable, but not all is lost. Ships from every group and civilization we've assisted thus far show up in the nick of time to fight alongside Vice. Clara, the Yafutomans, Dine, and the Blue Rogues. Hell, even the pirates we've hunted down for bounties team up against the greater threat. It's a pretty rad scene and goes to remind you just what a long journey it's been. There's something about Vice that brings everybody together. He's like Lloyd from Tales of Symphonia, but with even less self-doubt. His presence just inspires everybody. Enrique, in a last-ditch effort to appeal to his mother's morality, leaves the party and heads to Valua alone. I haven't mentioned it much, but Enrique's obviously had a lot of internal conflict to deal with over the course of the story. He's seen Valua heading down a dark path, as has his father figure Gregorio. Without enough influence to change things from the inside, they've had to watch this descent helplessly. Enrique does fight on the side of good, but it's conflicting knowing that the bad team consists of your mother and your own countrymen. It's difficult to stand up against the prevailing narrative, especially when your own family is so entrenched in it. At least he's got some supportive colleagues in his corner. This is one vice we could all use in our lives. Get it? Like the character, not like smoking or gambling. Sadly, Enrique is too late to make a difference. Zelos is summoned, beckoning the rains of destruction to obliterate the city of Valua. The Empress, along with nearly all of the citizens, are killed, and Enrique's life is saved by Beliza. It's a harrowing scene. All of the people we've interacted with, their hopes and dreams, erased in an instant. Galcian's plan had involved using Zelos to force a worldwide stalemate, a kind of false peace. Insubordination punishable with extinction. Valua represents a significant problem, but Galcian's solution is nothing short of abominable. It's a very real moment in an otherwise whimsical game. Contrary to that scene of horror, the climax of the game is pretty spectacular, with Vice and his patchwork army facing down Galcian. The game circumvents technical challenges by lowering distant model detail, resulting in a scene that manages to show some impressive scale. There are several back-to-back boss fights, starting with an assault on Galcian's mobile tech base, the Hydra. It wouldn't be a traditional RPG unless the ending took us to a tech base. It's worth noting that after acquiring the Delphinus, most naval battles are quite straightforward. As long as you have an ample supply of cheaply available repair items, you're likely going to be in good shape. Boarding the Hydra, you're given a chance to pick between the occupants of the revolving fourth party spot. For me, it's Drachma.
Gotta be.
I'm always curious whether people pick the more thematically appropriate character or just their favorite to use in moments like this. Drachma is getting old, it just makes sense that he'd lend his prosthetic hand to the boarding party. He's been searching for meaning after making his peace with Roknam, and what greater cause than this? If this is his final hurrah, then it's been a good run. Enrique has real personal reasons to confront Galcian as well. I think it probably makes the most sense to bring him along. I'm not sure what kind of reasoning you could cook up for Gilder, but Gilder's cool, so I wouldn't blame you if you took him. There's a weird structural decision made by the developers here. The final bounty is located within the Hydra. Lord Zivelin Bane, the leader of a bandit tribe you can have some optional encounters with. I don't really understand why this is. Even if you backtrack to the entrance, fly over to Sailor's Island and cash in the bounty, well, you're at the endgame already. You're probably flush with cash, and without a New Game Plus, it's not like you can enjoy any of the rewards. It just strikes me as pointless. After losing a battle with the party, Galcian begins his escape, but he's promptly stopped by Beliza. She flies her ship directly into Galcian, sacrificing herself and stopping Galcian in the process. This is not totally out of left field. When Beliza initially takes the moon crystal from Vice, she explains the reasoning behind her power grab. Her father was a Valuan soldier who died in war. She joined the military in order to unite the world under one banner, meaning she saw Valuan conquest as a ticket to the greater good for all humanity. Over the course of the story, her heart changes as she witnesses the means to this end. She participates in the coup only because it represents the path of lesser resistance, but seeing the destruction brought forth by Zelos, it seems she's made up her mind. It's often difficult to tell where her allegiances lie. She's repeatedly referred to as a master of deception throughout the story. Her numerous interactions with Vice and crew, the way she'll show up and leave unannounced, leaves some room for mistrust. I like that. It's nice having some characters you just can't get a read on, especially when they redeem themselves in such a grand way. In a genre whose stories are defined by betrayal, redemption is always a welcome sight. With Galcian dead, Ramirez has become lost. He once again instructs Zelos to send the rains of destruction down, but from the sky descends the Silver Elders. For 1,000 generations, the Elders have cleansed the worlds they deemed unfit to exist. Now, because of Fina's experiences, they express empathy with mankind for the first time. They sacrifice themselves to save Arcadia and break the cycle forever. Ramirez lashes out. Instead of accepting Fina's grace, he decides to destroy everything in this meaningless world. He merges with Zelos and becomes, "Oh sweet, a man-made horror beyond my comprehension." The final battle? Well, what can you say about it? His design is pretty cool, but the battle is won as so many others. Delta Shield, Cure Items, and Pirate's Wrath. It's a little disappointing to see the battle take place on the Delphinus deck. Every random battle we fought for the last 30 hours took place on the Delphinus deck, so something a little more outrageous would have left a bigger impact, given the simplicity of the battle itself. It's interesting to note some ways in which localization changes affected Ramirez. Prior to the script changes, Ramirez was pathologically obsessed with Galcian. In the English version, his allegiances to Galcian are still plain to see, but it's more like a general hatred towards the world that drives him. An example plucked from the Skies of Arcadia wiki, before the battle begins, his Japanese dialogue translates to, "I will make you realize my anger, my sorrow, over the loss of Lord Galcian." In the English version, he says, "Now you shall feel the wrath of Zelos. You will suffer for all eternity. Zelos will feast on your souls." Clayton Vorlick said in an interview, there were some interesting changes like how Ramirez's obsession with Galcian was downtoned near the end. I mean, he's still obsessed, but he was saying Galcian's name like every other sentence in the Japanese version. I can understand how that obsession might be jarring, but I think this represents a real missed opportunity to expand on Ramirez's character. The reason he becomes an avatar of the Silver Elders is presumably because he's loyal and obedient, that or he was groomed to be that way. It's those very traits that lead him astray on his quest. In Arcadia, Fina and Ramirez each gain something they'd never had before. Friendships, relationships, purpose, meaning. Only their experiences diverge when Ramirez experiences betrayal. With blood on his own hands, he now sees Galcian as a symbol of hope and strength, an ambition for power detached from the emotions that got Ramirez into trouble. It makes sense that someone with such limited experience and with his own feelings in disarray would latch onto the first figure that promises him something greater, even if it means becoming a tool for its success. Nonetheless, the dialogue does a reasonable job of showing why he's become so plainly evil. This is in no small part thanks to Doc's side quest. His once innocent spirit was corrupted, which often is the case in times of conflict. Ramirez is defeated and the party severs the cycle of destruction, once and for all. All that remains of Ramirez now is a piece of the Silver Moon crystal, so Vice, as is Blue Rogue custom, returns his remains to the skies. Soltis sinks back into the depths and Fina makes peace with the loss of her old life. Of all the video game cliches, there are few I appreciate more than endings where we get to see what happened to all of the people we met along the way. And friends, I tell you, Skies of Arcadia fits the bill. Vice and his crew have never needed a reason to sail, so their future is clear. Gilder returns to his ship in search of fun and riches. Drachma, his peace made, is ready to return to the simple life of a fisherman. Enrique resolves to rebuild Valua, this time as a force for good. It doesn't just end with the crew. We watch as Enrique and Moegi get married. Cities are rebuilt, new alliances are forged, and our heroes sail off into the seven skies. We even get to see the resulting lives of all supporting characters in a credit sequence too. With this beautiful music playing, it's liable to bring a tear to your eye, especially seeing that Drachma died a happy fisherman. Godspeed, you old grump ass. What did I tell you? Sometimes you just know you'll be sad to see a journey end, even when you haven't started it yet. I gotta be honest with you, I did not expect to fall in love with Skies of Arcadia the way I did. Sometimes there's a reason that games stay niche, and nostalgia can blind us to those reasons. But fall for Arcadia I did, and I fell hard. This game is a celebration of everything I love about video games. There's an innocent joy omnipresent throughout the adventure. It's colorful, whimsical, and delightful, but there's complexity to be unearthed if you choose to do so. Yes, it's far from perfect. Some blemishes become more and more apparent as you approach the end of this roughly 50-hour journey, but Skies of Arcadia is just such a magical game that its missteps are easily forgiven. The story may not wrap you up in a metaphysical struggle for the soul of mankind, but it calls out to something inside of you, says, hey, life got you down? Cynicism getting the better of you? That inner child is still here. I can prove it. And then it does. Personally, I can't put a price on that. After experiencing the adventures of an air pirate, all I can say is, maybe the real treasure was the friends we made along the way. Saying that unironically was a bucket list item for me. Skies of Arcadia's composer said he wrote the final credits theme not with finality but with open-endedness in mind, hinting at future adventures. But those adventures never came. It seems to be a fate many games I've covered on this channel share. Skies of Arcadia might have made a great series. One can't help but wonder what secrets are yet to be unearthed, what histories have been buried, what threats still haunt the skies. In lieu of that, let's appreciate the fact that Kodama and her team were able to express their vision with such an unforgettable work. And hey, who knows what awaits us beyond the horizon. A big thank you to my patrons as I answer some rapid-fire Patreon questions. You did it! I was worried for a moment. Too many to count, I've started and dropped Okami a few times due to sheer length, even though it's a great game. You've waited this long, have faith, my friend. Utility-wise, the standard black bean is high tier, but I do like those honey-flavored Bush's beans. I periodically replay Shadow Ops Red Mercury for some reason. Yep, it's a great game, but the running animation bugs me, and I can't say why. Jester, this thing was Pimp City. Yes, try to get it from a food truck. The Ottawa-Gatineau region supposedly has the best poutine in the country. I think I'd go with the Veltal-sized duck since its fleshy exterior and lack of opposable thumbs leave it open to firearm injury. If Melchior gets a hold of the duck-sized Veltals, I'd basically be up shit creek. Well, she has bonitis, so she's not strong, but she is as healthy as can be. I've been thinking about making some casual audio reviews for Patreon or something. Stay tuned. System Shock horror movie with practical effects. Proof that 7 out of 10s can be more enjoyable than 9 out of 10s. Diddy Kong Racing Chrono Cross Ocarina of Time. Diddy Kong Racing Chrono Cross Ocarina of Time. Running Shine Matthew Matosis Mandalore CGR Undertow and a channel that stopped uploading 15 years ago called Sycophant. Favorite is 5th or 6th gen and least favorite principally is 7th gen, but I'm not a huge fan of actually playing 1st or 2nd gen. I'll give you 2, Metro 2033 and Don't Starve. Daggerfall Unity with mods. Daggerfall, but with the volume turned up. Just kidding, Jess. I'll bring Left 4 Dead 2 with mods. I've thought about it. Probably tie it into a podcasty thing somehow. Alright, and I'd like to especially thank those in my Persons of Lordly Caliber Patreon tier. This list is getting long. Adam Safranco, Matthew Sean Dick, Banana Turnip, Sleepy, Avil, and Hime Takamura, thank you both. True Manalist, Scatmouth, Spencer Kennelly, Smo Bun, I'm Emil Castagne's #1 fan, Captain, BB Squirrel, JBK, Shane Shackelford, Mr. Shifty, Emmy, Buster Drew, Francois, Fanar, Fenrir Live, Xenogears, Olo Shadow, Guko, Jordan Laughlin, Eldon Rosen, Jordan Miller, Hayden Hudson, Rocketman, Alejandro Garcia Lopez, Jay Hyun, Bucky Bourne, and Azure Midsummer. Woo! I sincerely appreciate each one of you. Thank you so much for your support. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment to please the eldritch algorithm gods. If you're in a position to do so, consider checking out my Patreon, which nets a number of bonuses, including some Discord shenanigans. Having a reliable Patreon is really good for this channel because it lets me continue to dig into semi-obscure games like Skies of Arcadia, and also not have to worry so much about YouTube's changing guidelines, so I really appreciate those of you who have pledged, thank you. And thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until I see you next time, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.